Hello everyone, today I have a amazing story for this. The year was 1956 in the sun-drenched hills of Hilo, Hawaii, where 9-year-old Robert sat at his wooden school desk, feeling a strange sense of isolation. His school was primarily filled with the children of wealthy plantation owners, doctors, and business executives, and just that morning, Robert and his best friend Mike had been left out of a weekend beach trip simply because they were labeled the poor kids. Driven by a mixture of anger and curiosity, Robert approached his biological father that evening, a highly educated man who held a PhD and served as the superintendent of education for the state of Hawaii. Robert asked his father how to get rich, and his father lowered his newspaper, sighed gently, and told him that if he wanted to be rich, he had to learn how to make money by using his head. The next day, Robert teamed up with Mike and came up with a business plan based on a literal interpretation of making money by going door to door to ask neighbors for empty lead toothpaste tubes. For weeks, Robert's garage was turned into a makeshift factory where they melted the lead tubes in a steel pot and poured the liquid metal into plaster molds to create counterfeit nickel coins. Just as they were admiring their first batch of shiny new nickels, Robert's highly educated father walked in, half amused and half horrified, to explain that this operation was illegal counterfeiting. He laughed and told the boys that if they really wanted to learn how to be wealthy, they should ask Mike's father, who wasn't a school teacher but owned several growing businesses and was on his way to becoming a very rich man. The following Saturday, Robert and Mike walked into the office of Mike's father, a man who had never finished the 8th grade, but carried himself with an undeniable air of confidence. This man, who would become Robert's rich dad, agreed to teach them how to make money on the condition that they would learn through working rather than sitting in a classroom. He offered them a job cleaning shelves and dusting canned goods at his commissary store for 3 hours every Saturday at the rate of 10 cents an hour. For 3 weeks, Robert endured the mind-numbing, dusty work until his anger boiled over at the thought of working for such miserable pay, while Rich Dad had not spoken a single word of financial advice to them. When Robert finally confronted Rich Dad to accuse him of being greedy and exploitative, Rich Dad smiled and remarked that Robert now sounded exactly like most of his regular employees. Rich Dad explained that most people blame their employers, low pay, or the economy for their problems because they are driven by the twin emotions of fear and greed. The fear of being broke motivates them to work hard, and once they get their paycheck, greed kicks in to make them think about all the beautiful things they can buy, which traps them in a vicious cycle known as the rat race. To teach Robert how to break free from this cycle, Rich Dad then offered a new deal where the boys would continue to work for him, but this time they would be paid absolutely 0 cents an hour. Working for free forced the boys to stop looking for a paycheck and instead use their imagination to spot financial opportunities that others missed entirely. While dusting the shelves one afternoon, Robert noticed the store manager cutting the front covers off old comic books to return them to the distributor for credit while throwing the rest of the book away. The boys asked the distributor for the discarded comic books and used them to set up a comic book library in Mike's basement, charging neighborhood kids an admission fee of 10 cents to read as many books as they wanted in 2 hours. They hired Mike's younger sister to manage the library, and within weeks, they were generating a massive passive income without doing any physical labor themselves, proving Rich Dad's lesson that the rich do not work for money, but rather make money work for them. As the years passed, Robert continued to study under both fathers and observed a stark contrast in how they managed their finances and viewed the world. His highly educated biological father, whom he called Poor Dad, believed in the traditional script of going to school, getting good grades, and finding a safe, secure job with excellent benefits while buying a nice house. Rich Dad, on the other hand, insisted that the school system only teaches people to be great employees while leaving them financially illiterate. Rich Dad taught Robert that financial intelligence is simply the ability to understand the difference between an asset and a liability, defining an asset as something that puts money into your pocket, and a liability as something that takes money out of your pocket. Poor Dad always proudly claimed that his house was his biggest asset, but Rich Dad fiercely disagreed by explaining that a house is actually a liability because it takes money out of your pocket every single month through mortgages, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Rich Dad showed Robert that while the poor and middle class spend their lives accumulating liabilities that they mistake for assets, the wealthy focus all their energy on buying income-generating assets like real estate, stocks, bonds, and intellectual property. The cash flow from these assets automatically flows back into the investor's income column, creating a self-sustaining engine of wealth that grows exponentially over time. The mindsets of the two fathers were completely reflected in the daily language they used around the house. Poor Dad would look at expensive items and say he couldn't afford them, which served as a statement of fact that allowed his brain to go to sleep. Rich Dad strictly forbade that phrase and instead forced his children to ask how they could afford something, a question that opened up creative possibilities and exercised the mind to find solutions. Poor Dad valued absolute job security and feared making mistakes, while Rich Dad viewed failure as a necessary stepping stone to success and taught Robert that the biggest risk in life is not taking any risks at all. Rich Dad also introduced Robert to the history of taxes and the legal power of corporations, explaining that while ordinary employees are taxed immediately on their earnings and must live on what remains, a corporation operates on a completely different set of rules. A corporation earns money, spends as much as it legally can on business expenses like travel, meals, and company cars, and is only taxed on the remaining net profit. By mastering accounting, investing, market trends, and tax law, wealthy individuals utilize the legal structure of corporations to protect their wealth, while the uneducated middle class continues to bear the heaviest tax burdens. After serving as a Marine Corps helicopter pilot in the Vietnam War, Robert returned home and chose to take a sales job at the Xerox Corporation, not for the money, but to learn how to overcome his intense fear of rejection. He struggled heavily at first, but by pushing through his fears and mastering communication, he became the #1 salesman at the company and used his increased commissions to buy small, cash-flowing rental condominiums. Robert realized that the greatest obstacles to wealth are not a lack of money, but rather internal emotional struggles such as fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, and arrogance. By consistently applying Rich Dad's principles of paying himself first and continuously expanding his financial education, Robert retired completely free at the age of 47, leaving behind the rat race and proving that the human mind, when trained properly, is the most powerful asset in the world.